Sonny Murray here from Perennia Food and Agriculture.
Caitlin Congdon, I'm the field crop specialist.
And today we're standing in our cover crop plots that were held over from last year. So these plots were planted midsummer the previous year, grown out for one of the trials we were doing, and the farmer was gracious enough to overwinter them for us, let them grow for a little while in the spring to see what we can learn from these cover crop species across this field. The farmer let these grow early spring, and he applied 1 liter of Credit Extreme, which is a glyphosate product, May 1st. So you can see that the Roundup is starting to take effect across the cover crop species. Some of them are dropping off, some of them are coming through. It's important to realize that the farmer applied 1 liter per acre, which is kind of a mid-rate, and may not be strong enough to take out all the cover crop species, and that's what we're going to look at today.
So really interesting to see here, we have 3 strips of different ryegrasses. So the furthest one over here is perennial ryegrass. You can see it's dying off fairly well with that Roundup application. In the middle here is annual ryegrass, and it's dying off fairly well as well, but there's also quite a bit of winter-killed area here. So you can see the pieces that died over the winter, and the Roundup's just kind of taking care of the rest of it. And then this last strip here is Italian ryegrass, and it's honestly, there's a little bit of discoloration from the Roundup application, but overall it's really pushing through, and the Roundup is not going to take care of that at that particular rate.
It's kind of interesting that some of the ryegrass species are already going to head, and the Italian ryegrass is a little bit slower, but I still expect that to be pushing up heads before the end of the month and producing seed. So whichever ryegrass you're using, you want to make sure you get it under control before it sets viable seed, or you're going to have ryegrass on your farm for the future. So just as a side, I think it's very interesting to have a look at herbicide symptomology. In this case, we put on a straight Roundup. So what does a Roundup injury look like on a plant? It looks like chlorosis is the first thing you're going to notice, and that's going to progress into necrosis, which is an expensive way to say it's going to turn yellow and then it's going to turn brown. You're going to see that first in the growing point. The Roundup is such an effective herbicide because it translocates both up and downward in that plant using both the xylem and the phloem. It's going to accumulate in the underground root tips. It's also going to accumulate in the meristematic area and the young leaves of the plant. So that's where you're going to see the yellowing first. So in order to get the kill that we're looking for, one of the things many growers do, first thing is they reach for a tank mix, right? So we can broaden the range of the effectiveness of that herbicide, and to get those weeds or vegetation killed down quicker so that we can drill into it. So what are our tank mix options that we could have used? And when we're dealing with grasses, there aren't a lot of tank mix options that we can use, to be honest. We could have thrown in Aragon, and that would have killed the vegetation down much quicker, but that can only be used on certain crops. So Aragon can be used as a tank mix spring or fall. But only in front of corn, soybeans, and cereals. If we were into a horticulture crop, we wouldn't want to use Aragon because it leaves a soil residue that could affect our next crop. So we've got to be very careful with what crop we're following that tank mix burn down application with, right? Roundup is very safe in that regard because we don't have to worry about the soil residue with Roundup giving us a herbicide injury into our next crop. So in this case, we're dealing with prominently grasses, and there's not a lot of tank mix options. In order to get the better control of that Italian ryegrass, we can up our rate of Credit Extreme. That's the product that we used in this case. The upper limit on that is 1.67 liters per acre. and that would have given us a quicker control on those ryegrass and complete control. If we're dealing with other weeds or other cover crop species like a clover, that kind of thing, and we'll look at those next, we can get into some other tank mix products that we could have used. So now we're in our legume plots. This side we have double cut red clover, this side we have hairy vetch. And these had the 1 liter rate of Credit Extreme applied to them as well, same as our ryegrass plots, and at the same timing. When you compare broadleaves to grasses, grasses tend to be more susceptible to Roundup in general. Broadleaves tend to take longer to die from a Roundup application. When we're talking about clover, they tend to be quite tolerant, especially to medium to low rates of glyphosate. So they're looking actually quite healthy 2 weeks after application of that 1 liter per acre. So now we're standing in our legume plots, straight legume. On this side we have hairy vetch, and on this side we have a double cut red clover. Again, these were planted midsummer last year and allowed to overwinter, and we had terrific winter survival on both species, and we had great regrowth. Sometimes you can see a little bit of winter injury or winter kill on the vetch, but this past year was fairly mild overall. It came through looking great, and now we have a complete carpet of regrowth this spring. The first thing a farmer wants to do is put 2,4-D in the tank as soon as he sees the legume, right? I want to add 2,4-D in order to get much better kill on those legumes.
Yeah, so the key with adding 2,4-D in is that you have to pay attention to how long you have between the application and before you can plant your crop. So at a ½ liter per acre rate of 2,4-D, you have to wait 15 days before you can plant soybeans and 7 days before you can plant corn. And then if you up that to between a ½ liter to a liter per acre rate, then that extends your window before you can plant even more. So it's up to 30 days before soybeans and 14 days before you can plant corn.
If you were doing a fall kill, you'd be okay to put 2,4-D in the tank because you have enough time before planting. Of course, doing the fall kill doesn't maximize your nitrogen production from these two legumes, and it doesn't maximize the amount of organic matter you're going to get either. Caitlin talked about corn and soybeans, but the same rings true if we're coming in here with forages as well. We want to make sure that we have the correct amount of time from that 2,4-D application to the planting of those forages, because that 2,4-D can really affect that establishment. If we're talking about horn crops, we want to leave 2,4-D out entirely on a spring application, fine for the fall, because those horn crops are so sensitive to 2,4-D, and a lot of them are small seeded as well.
What about using dicamba?
So dicamba is very effective on legumes. It's kind of the go-to for killing down alfalfa. Great on red clover, also on vetch, but it has a much longer residual in the soil than 2,4-D.
So if you're going to use dicamba as an option, then you're good to go if you're going into corn. But if you are going into soybeans, you want to make sure that they are extend soybeans so that they are not affected by any residual from that dicamba.
The other herbicide that we could probably use is lawn trout. Lawn trout very effective on all legumes, but you should really only use it ahead of corn because it leaves quite a residual in the soil, especially for any legumes that you're trying to establish. Soybean is certainly a legume. So Caitlin, what other options do we have to kill legume cover crops ahead of field crops?
Yeah, so Aragon is a great one. You can use that ahead of cereals, soybeans, or corn. So nice and versatile.
I think most farmers are familiar with the Aragon ahead of winter wheat as weed control in their winter wheat, but now we're going to use it in a little bit of a different scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and Express is another one that you could use with cereals or soybeans, but not in front of corn.
I think both of those herbicides are going to act quite quickly compared to the Roundup that we used to alone. Unfortunately, ahead of horse crops, we don't have a lot of options. So in this day of Roundup resistant weeds, we certainly want to encourage people to use the tank mix. But ahead of horse crops, we don't have a lot of options that won't leave a residual that's going to affect those horse crops. So I think the best thing we can do is try and control those legumes when they're young, so that our glyphosate is much more effective, and go with a higher rate. So that's going to do a few things for you. Higher rate is going to give you a better killing the cover crops when they're younger, and that's also going to give you more time before you have to go in there and seed those horse crops as well. Time for those legumes to die down.
So what would have happened if you came in and mowed this off and then did your herbicide after that?
Yeah. So we'd be left with that well-developed root system, but we would have removed our leaf area, right? So when we remove that leaf area, you don't have as much total area for the herbicide to be taken up through, and I think our kill would actually be a lot slower and a lot more. We might actually see no kill and some regrowth from that cover crop.
Okay, so you can see that there wasn't a lot of kill on these nice luscious legumes, but if you get up really close, you can see that there was some herbicide effect. These individual leaves, there's some speckling on there. That's the result of the herbicide injury, and the new growth is where that herbicide really concentrated. So you can see the new growth is definitely paler, and it's taking up that herbicide more than the greener, older growth. Okay, so if you're planning to intercrop a cover crop into your corn at that 4-leaf stage, what should you be worried about for residual on some of those products?
Yeah, so if I use lawn trowel to kill the clover ahead of the corn crop, and wanted to interseed my corn with a cover crop, I should be probably staying away from legumes if I use lawn trowel and rely on ryegrass instead. The corn herbicide, of course, there's lots written about which corn herbicides are used in that system.
And the sensitivity of those cover crops to the different corn herbicides.
But if I use lawn trowel up front of my burn down, then I probably don't want to be using a clover in that interseeded cover crop.
So if you're thinking about going into your next crop, you want to really think about what kind of tillage you're planning to do, and what might be possible depending on the cover crop residue that you have left. So just looking at this vetch and even the clover here, they're really quite thick, and if you are going to try to no-till that, it is going to cause all sorts of problems. Just gum up your machinery, and it's not going to be a good situation. So this, you're definitely going to want to cultivate when it's looking like this. And disking is probably not going to do the trick either. Just because there is so much biomass here, you're probably going to have to plow it in to get a good enough seed bed to go into it after that. So if you are planning on doing a certain type of tillage, whether that's no-till or disking or whatever, you just want to think about terminating your cover crop in order to make that happen. So if you're planning on planting in 2 days' time, then you're going to have to go with the heavier tillage here. But if you have some time, or if you had thought about this a couple of weeks ago and could kill it earlier, in order to make it so that you could do disking or you could go into a no-till, then that's some of the considerations that you need to think about.
Killing it early is going to do two things for you, really. You're not going to have as much regrowth at the time.
Yep.
And it's going to give longer for that herbicide to do its activity and hopefully desiccate that residue for you.
Yeah. All right, so in this annual ryegrass, we do see some overwintering here of the live stuff, and this is material that would have died over the winter, especially with a mild winter like we had the 2022-23. You're going to get more of this coming through. All right, just getting back to tillage, looking at these different ryegrass species and what we might be able to do with them. We're not really going to be able to no-till directly into these as is, again, just because of the volume of biomass that we have, particularly the stuff that hasn't really killed down much yet. That's a lot to contend with if you're trying to no-till. However, I do think there are some opportunities for some strip tillage or something like that, particularly if you pulled some strips in the fall. It kind of pre-clears that strip and that area that you're going to go into, and then when you come in the spring and spray everything down, then it's just kind of melting away from that strip that you've already pulled. So if your herbicide application hasn't killed things down as effectively as it could have, then you're looking at using tillage to do that for you. And in that situation, you're going to need some fairly hefty tillage to do that in order to get the seed bed that you want. Okay, so these strips are pearl millet here and sorghum Sudan grass, and they are both effectively quite dead. So this is an opportunity to do some more minimal tillage or no-till. We do have this residue sitting on the soil surface, so if we are doing no-till, it is going to break down quite a bit slower than if it were incorporated. However, there's a lot of soil visible here through the residue, so if you have some nice sharp opening discs, you're going to be able to cut through a lot of this with a no-till machine to get your planting done. If your discs are not sharp, then what you're running into is a hairpinning effect, where you're just pushing this residue down into the soil, and it acts as a barrier between your soil and your seed, so you're getting really poor seed-to-soil contact. You're going to get limited moisture reaching that seed, which in a spring like this one is especially problematic for germination and emergence.
So here on the right, again, this is our sorghum Sudan grass. You know, the root ball has significantly reduced since last fall. And here, the pearl millet, which is almost gone. So really building beautiful soil tilth in both cases, but probably a little bit even more with that pearl millet.
Alright, so the last one I want to talk about in regards to tillage is this pea residue. And I just scooped this right off the soil surface, and it left a really nice bare soil underneath. So not going to be an issue. It's going to be really easy to till into whatever method that you are planning to use. Oats and peas are a really nice mix for no-till. They're going to winter kill, and it's going to be a nice easy go in the spring.
So when it comes to cover cropping, you have a lot of different species you can choose from, but I think what you have to keep in mind is how you're going to terminate it. So when you're choosing those tank mix partners, it's very important that we think about what the next crop is and what species of cover crop you're trying to terminate.
You also want to think about your planting method and your tillage system. And all of those factors are going to play into when you kill it, how you kill it, and how it all comes together.